The next thing we're going to talk about is functions. But before we talk about functions, let's do a little bit I would say review or introduction of a function that is important, which is printf. Printf might be one of the most important function you encounter in C programming. In particular, when this is the first time you learn C language, this is going to be something you always use. So when we are using printf, you might notice that we are printing out different kinds of stuff. So normally when we are printing out a variable, the variable is going to be over here. So if we want to print out the answer over here, what are we going to put over here? So it depending on what is the variable, what is the data type over here. If the data type over here is an integer, then you will need to put b over here. So in other words, if this answer, so this can be 0, 1, 2, 3, if your answer is 1.2562, obviously this one is a floating point, so you can no longer use d. You will need to use this one to represent that. So normally we'll just use f. Okay, so when we are using f, it's going to print out 1.2562. If you are doing something like percentage %d, then you're going to get the answer as 1. The other thing which is important that you need to know is let's say this number this time is okay, it can be a little bit tedious, but what's important is that I only want to know the first 3 digits after the point. So what I'm going to do is put 3f over here, so the answer is going to be 1.475, and ignore all the other digits. So this can be handy, and that would be something that you need to know in this column. Over here, this part, the column on the right hand side is talking about the format of data type. On the left hand side, it has nothing to do with the data type, but this has something to do with how you're going to print it out. So you say there is a new line, it means that I'm not going to print things in the same line, so I'm going to use /n. If I don't want to, I just want to print something in the same line but with some space, then you can put space over here, or you can just put /t, so you will jump for 8 characters. If you want to jump for vertically, then use v. If you want to start a new page, then it's going to be f. But typically this one and this one are the most common ones that we are doing, and this one are the most common ones that we are dealing with in C language. So this thing over here is going to be handy, and you might want to keep this somewhere so that you can look it up how a printf can be used in our program. But if you want to look up online, the c++.com can be a very good reference for this thing as well. Okay, let's talk about functions. So functions, we talked about that in the earlier video. It means that if we have repeated part, if we need to execute certain part of a code for many times, you can type that in your main program for many times, but it's not efficient. So instead of typing the code multiple times, we would like to have a function that run this. We can kind of put this repeated part in a specific function and call that for many times, so we can run that as many times as we can, but meanwhile we are reducing the size of the main program. So this is one example over here. I specify a function which is start bar. So this start bar over here is being executed twice in the main function. So it seems like I'm not doing anything within this main function. It's a little bit different because every time we want to use a variable, we need to use int or float to declare our numbers. But when we are dealing with functions, why we don't need to do any declaration like int or float within the main function? We don't do that because we are doing that externally. So when we declare a function, outside the main function, it means that all the subroutine within this C code can use this specific function. So if it is called within the main function, if I have another function I want to use here, I can do it because it has been open to every functions we have in the program. But keep in mind, if you want to do that, you need to declare just like what we declare for a variable in the very beginning. So every time we have those kind of things, you need to do this procedure. Then we can use that any place we want to. So you might feel interested. Okay, so I use int before main function. I use void before main function. So what does those means? When we are declare a function, there are a few types. One is void. The other one is int or float or character. As many times as we can even use double. So when we are using void, it means that after the end of the specific function, you do not need to return anything. So that's the reason. You can run as many lines as you want to within the main function, but you don't need to return anything. But if you are using int, it means that in the end of this part, you will need to return an integer back to the system. So that is going to be the definition of the function, which kind of data type we need to return to a system, to whatever code this function after this part of code has been finished. So if you see there is an int in front of the function name, it means that this function must return an integer after this function is completed. Does it make sense? So if you are using void, you don't need to return anything. If you are using a float, you need to return the float point number back to where it is called. So that is something important to the programming. So you might say, okay, if I don't want to return anything, can I ignore this part and just leave it something like this? The answer is no. Even though you are not going to return anything, you still need to use void to declare your function. So that is very important. Just keep in mind. And the other thing is, when we call a function, in many cases we might need to pass the parameter from one function to the other. So we can use things within the parentheses. So you can pass integer, you can pass floating number, you can pass whatever characters to another function as long as you define in the very beginning. So let's get back to the previous slides. So over here, I use void. It means that I'm not going to put anything to the function. But over here, printf is also another function. So we are putting different kind of parameters in this function, and those things needs to be defined when you are initialize the function. Okay, so those kind of things are important when you try to develop a big program using C. Those are the basic techniques you might need to remember. Okay, so we talk about if we want to use integer, then that is just follow whatever we have in the previous slide. But if we don't want to pass any parameters to the function, you have two ways of doing it. You can use this one, or you can put a void over here. Void means that I'm not going to pass anything, just run the code. That will be good enough. Depending on which kind of C compiler you're using, you might get some warning information, but it won't affect the execution of the code. So it doesn't matter whether you use void or you don't use void. It's pretty okay. So those are things you might pay a little bit attention when you are defining a new function. The other thing is recursive. Recursive is a very special type of functions we're going to use. The recursion means that within the function, I'm going to call myself again. You might feel this is a little bit weird. Yes, it is. You can see this one over here. This is up and down. So this is going to be the part of executing the code. So over here, you might run this one as 1. So I'm going to pass 1 into the system. So it's going to be print out the value 1, and over here it's going to be run again. So it's going to be n equals to smaller than 4. So it will pass another number 2 into this one. So it's going to be 2. Then it's going to be, so within this one, n equals to 2, but it will call itself again, so it becomes 3, and it becomes, so when it's 4, then this one is not going to run itself, so it's going to come up, so it's going to be 3, 2, 1, like repeated everything again. So we can actually call ourselves. The function can actually call itself, and sometimes this can be handy and very powerful programming technique. However, as a beginner of C programming language, I wouldn't suggest you do something like this, because in many cases, if you are not controlling everything correctly, you won't break the loop. You will be trapped within this function forever, and when you are trapped, your system might be crushed because it eats up too much memory in your system, and sometimes you're going to feel that the whole system is kind of slowed down because the requirement of memory is increasing, and it took too much CPU running time, so it will drag the system down, and eventually the whole system will be crushed. So recursive programming skill is not really recommended if you don't know what you're really doing, and you don't define a very clear way to break out from the function itself. So unless you know what you do and you're a skilled programmer, otherwise recursion is not really recommended. Okay. The other thing is we want to talk about is address of a variable. So when we are talking about a variable, we normally say that, okay, I initialize x in the beginning. Then I put x as 24. Now, if I print this one out, what happened? Since I put 24 into x, then certainly I'm going to print out 24 since this is the number of x. But what does this mean? NX. It means that what I'm going to get the address of x. In computer, you need to think in this way. So I'm doing an integer x, right? That's this line. So it's going to, let's say it's going to be 2 bytes. Just assume, because I'm not specifying what kind of process I'm using, so I'm just assume it's going to be 2 bytes. So when I start this one, I'm telling my system to reserve a 2-byte space for me so that I can store the number. So the system is going to do that. Then I'm telling the system, okay, put 24 in the space you reserved. So we put 24 over here. Now I'm telling the system, okay, tell me what is the number stored in this space, and tell me where do you store this number. So it's going to tell me what happened over here, and this one over here is address. It means that because we have, depending on what your system is like, let's say you have Windows 10 and you have 16 gigabyte memory. So we can now say, okay, we ask the system to specify an area for my variable. So when we say I want to specify this area, it's actually reserve a place with an address. Just like if you want to build a house, you need to reserve a lot, and this lot has its own number in a 2D plane, on a 2D plane in your town. So this is similar. When we are defining those kind of things, every time we turn on the computer, the memory, the number of memories has been determined, and each lot got its own number. In this case, this is going to be the number that I'm going to build my house, and the house I built over here is 24. So what I mean is, when you define a variable, you actually has 2 meanings. One is where you're going to put this variable, or where this is going to be located within the memory, and the other thing is what is the number stored at this specific spot of the memory. Okay, so this specific spot, NX, is my address.